Trigger, after dealing with nothing but Gridman for what feels like forever, is finally back with a cooking anime. Yes, a cooking anime. Technically the first adaptation of a source material that they have done in literally 10 years. Yes, Dungeon Meshi, or Delicious in Dungeon. A series that, honestly, just for the elf girl alone, is perfectly worth your time. But admittedly, for me myself, have a little bit of a struggle with. But anyhow, Dungeon Meshi is here. I am really excited for the series. I watched the PVs for it, and I thought it looked absolutely incredible. It really did feel like Trigger is back to its old ways with just pure shenanigans. It's going to be running for 2 whole cores. This is my thoughts on the first 2 episodes, so let's jump right into it. Dungeon Meshi opens up in a world where at some point there was this rumbling at this one small village. Now, everybody went to go investigate what the rumbling was. Its source was at this crypt where this guy comes out that claims that he was a king, claims that his kingdom is in the hands of a mad magician, and whoever goes down and saves his kingdom will be given everything, before promptly disappearing. We then cut forward 6 years, and there has been an established dungeon at this location. It's given pretty much the hints that as people are diving down into this crypts, it goes into this dungeon that they believe is possibly this kingdom. And we follow one such group that is actually diving in this dungeon. Unfortunately, right at the very get-go, we see that they're being attacked by a dragon, and at some point, this party member, Fallen, is consumed by a dragon. But just as she's going to get consumed, she actually casts a teleportation magic, which gets the rest of her party members out of the dungeon. Well, as they're trying to figure out what just happened, Laios, the tank of the party, decides very quickly, I need to go back down there because my sister is going to get digested by this dragon. Well, his other 2 party members, Marcel, which is their caster, and Chilchuck, which is their thief, both really quickly say, yeah, we're gonna go with you. There's only one big problem. The main reason why they were failing so desperately at fighting this dragon is because they were all hungry. They don't have any money, they can't buy any food, and their only option really is to sell their equipment. Well, Laios has a plan. He has a plan for them to be able to eat without actually having to pay for it. And that is actually to eat of the monsters of the dungeon itself as they dive into it. This is kind of unheard of, but there is some civilizations outside of normal towns that do actually eat monsters. And Laios is sort of a fanatic for monsters, and so he has one of these books that tells you how to eat them. And so thus begins the adventures of this party, diving in the dungeon, figuring out how to cook things. The first time they try to cook something, they end up having this one dwarf that shows up that offers to help them actually cook it properly and make it actually taste good. And so with his help, Senshi, they have at least somebody that is experienced in cooking this stuff. Much to the disappointment of Marcel, the elf, who absolutely hates the idea of eating this stuff. So my thoughts on Dungeon Meshi so far. I am really mixed about this show, and I came into expecting this. The PVs, like I said before, it looked absolutely incredible. The animation is bombastic. The character expressions and the voicing and everything is just going so perfectly. I could not be more pleased by how fun this show is, based on both the chemistry and the animation that's actually happening on the screen. Now, yes, let's just get the annoyance for me personally out of the way. And this is strictly me, and I don't really see this being a problem for a lot of people. I'm not a foodie person, despite my stature. And so yes, just like most cooking shows, all the segments about them cooking the food itself, preparing it, putting it together, my eyes glaze over. I get extremely bored watching it. Not that the entire show is this, but you can expect at least 2 segments per episode where it's just nothing but Senshi going through the whole process of how he's actually going to cook the food, putting it in the bowl, cooking it, and everybody consuming it and going, Sugoi, this is so great. But putting that aside, now that that's out of the way, what is the rest of the show? The rest of the show is really the great chemistry between the characters. You have Laios, he's a dork. He is the tank guy. He's actually seemingly a really terrible tank, because in the opening segment of the first episode, when they're being attacked by the dragon, he's just sitting there complaining about how he's hungry while everybody's being killed. There's a side of me that when I'm watching this series, I'm like, they don't really have a sense of urgency in this series. Like, nobody seems to care about, like, okay, this girl just got consumed and we got teleported out, and they're all being goofy about it. And it's like, girls being digested and you're all goofing around out here? There is like a lack of agency in this series that is kind of mind-boggling. But putting that aside, Laios is a dork, and he is obsessed with monsters. He loves the idea of consuming this stuff. So this is just all about him experimenting. They even point out at some point, you want to do this, right? Like, you're given an excuse now, so that's why you're doing this. Marcel, like I said before, is an absolute treat. I absolutely adore the resurgence of elves in anime. We got like Frieren, and we got this. It's just absolutely fantastic. She is a total dork. I would have to say my main reason for enjoying this show is 98% Marcel. And that's mainly because she is the straight man. She is the character that sees the absurdity in everything, and she's pointing it out. And her expressions and what Trigger does with her expressions is absolute comedy gold. She is an absolute dork. Now, outside of just her reactions to the food, which she doesn't want to do, and when she does enjoy it, and how she kind of points out certain things like how unpleasant it is and the idea of doing that. Like having this whole dream sequence where her mother's cooking her food and she puts out the plates and it's nothing but, monster food. And yes, technically every time they go to fight something, she's the one that gets attacked and nearly killed. And again, Laios stands off the side being a total idiot, not getting involved. And all he's obsessed with is, oh yeah, that the vines of that plant will plant seeds in you. How does it feel? It's like, dude, save somebody. But yes, there is another side of her and the idea that she feels, at least for the second episode, gets into her feeling like she is inadequate. Like she's going to be seen as useless because everybody else is doing something. You have Senshi is cooking the food. Chilchuck at some point is kind of doing all the trap stuff. Laios is a terrible tank. And then you have her where she feels like her magic is not being used enough. But Laios kind of tries to correct her in the idea that, we're going to need that more later on. But it's cute kind of seeing her try to put her knowledge into play because it seems like she has studied a lot. She's very book smart, at least, just not very experienced in applying it into the world. They have this whole segment where they're trying to get mandrakes. And so she decides to put the textbook to use, which is to tie a string to a dog and have the dog pull the mandrake out because mandrakes, in a lot of lore, scream and either kill somebody by the scream or at least mess you up pretty bad in the head, which in this case is the case because she gets completely turned stupid for a brief moment. Chilchuck is great. We didn't really get too much of him. He's kind of just the level-headed person. He's very chill. He's always kind of just observing how things happen. He is almost a straight man character, but at the same time, he's just kind of there to sort of point out how crazy Marcel's acting. But in the second episode, we get to see his skills at play, which is where we get more into the actual dungeon aspects of it, which is, yes, traps and all that kind of stuff, and how seriously he takes it. Because, yes, technically with the case of most thief characters, lock pickers, people that scout out and find traps, everybody's life is in his hands. And so it kind of showed a little bit of that frustration that he has when people don't follow his instructions and essentially put their lives at risk because he's trying to prevent them from dying. And then we have Senshi, who is the cook, which I'm already kind of assuming is probably the king. Like from the get-go when Senshi was first shown, they kind of talked about how the dungeon itself was attached 6 years prior. And he said that he's been in there, I think, for over 10 years or something like that. He's been cooking, researching food for over 10 years. Now, it could be just, outside monsters, but my assumption here is that he's probably the king. He's been down there for a long time, or maybe he's connected somehow to the king. But yes, he's the chef. I like his character, but at the same time, he also attaches to the thing that I don't really enjoy the most, which is the aspect of cooking. So outside of that, he's fine. Like, he's very entertaining. He's very much so just kind of putting all the other characters to the side and not really realizing how dangerous he's getting. Like, especially with the whole Chilchuck thing, he's just constantly doing things like, oh, this produces a fire? Well, I can fry things with that. Oh, that blade came down from the ceilings? Well, chop the meat up with that. He doesn't seem to have the mortal fears that most people have. He's just in his own world and always obsessed with food. Even the idea that they're looking for the sister who's in the belly of a dragon, he joins them because he wants to chop up the dragon and eat it. And everybody else is thinking, but should we eat something that technically ate one of our party members? It's a little unsettling, but that's, again, goes to that whole odd humor this series has, where it just doesn't seem to care about death and whatnot. Shoot, they even hung up this guy's corpse just so that people would be able to see them and get him out of the dungeon later on. There seems to be a lack of care for mortality in this series. But the point is, they all come together so perfectly. Like, they all accent each other so well. Obviously, Marcel is going to react a lot to Laios' absurdity. She's going to react a lot to what Senshi creates. Chilchuck, again, is frustrated with Senshi's lack of care for their safety and whatnot, and his focus on one thing. Learning from each other. And yes, the broader sense here, which is the thing that I'm extremely mixed on, is that this is a series that is taking that chemistry and then putting those characters through this dungeon. Now, this produces a few things here. We're getting essentially a deep dive, a deep look into the lore and the creatures of every single floor, which is a very creative way of doing it through cooking. We're learning about how each one of these monsters in this dungeon ticks, how they function, through the aspect that they both have to capture them, plus also cook them. So there is a really clever use here to really get in the geeky stuff about dungeons and monsters, which I really do like. I like how much thought is really put into everything in the ecosystem of this world. It's sort of like a deeper and more nerdy look into something like Made in Abyss. Made in Abyss I love because that creator is so creative with each level that they go down. Whereas Made in Abyss is more genius in the idea that this stuff is so foreign and so weird. Whereas Dungeon Meshi is taking monsters that we're kind of familiar with, like Chimera and stuff like that, and giving it a cooking spin and deeper diving into the monsters themselves. So they both kind of provide their own thing. Obviously, yes, Dungeon Meshi being a lot more comical than Made in Abyss, but that's where it kind of shines. I am a nerd at heart when it comes to dungeon diving and whatnot, and I do like all the integral things they're doing with the actual world they're sort of deep diving into. At the same time, yes, like I said, I will admit that when it gets into those deeper aspects of the monsters and how they cook, that's where it loses me. I can't help it. It's just a similar case that I had with Campfire Cooking in Another World. That's a series that I liked everything around it, but when it got to the point where he'd have to spend, what feels like 5 minutes just chopping up meat and putting spices into a bowl and frying it up, I don't care. I get so bored. And I sort of get the same thing with this. This is kind of one of those shows where I'm probably going to watch the whole series, but just whenever it gets into the nerdy cooking stuff, I'm probably going to be hitting the right arrow just to kind of skip forward like 5 seconds to get past this segment and move on. Because everything else around that, everything minus the cooking, I love about the series. And again, it's a lot to do with the animation and the character expressions and the comedy and the chemistry of the characters themselves that just absolutely captured me so much. It was literally what I see in the PV, seeing this band of dorks running down a hallway with something chasing them or something like that. This is what I want. This is what I feed on, and I absolutely adore it for that. So it's kind of one of those series where I know in the end, when it's all said and done, my review will be, for me personally, it's almost a perfect show, minus the one thing that for me, I just don't care for. But yeah, if you want to learn how to make mandrake kakiagi, it shows you. If you want to know how to make tempura out of bats, it's going to show you everything you need to know about it. I don't know how the writer knows how to make bats into tempura, but actually bat tempura is about the only thing you can probably make in a real world. I mean, there's other creatures like, they're chopping up a scorpion to cook it. And technically, I guess you could do that, but if you could find a big enough scorpion. But it's just absurd like that, which is, yes, technically something I really enjoy. But again, in the end of the day, we all know why we're watching this show, and it's Marcel. She is absolutely the gem of the show itself. I just adore her. She is so goofy, and I just cannot get enough of her. And it's honestly a rare case of a character that I love, like every voicing role that has been done for her, because you can watch any English, Japanese, German, all these different versions of the actual dub for this series as it airs on Netflix. And yeah, I've seen a lot of people pointing out the German version, which is super good. Like the voice actors that are doing Marcel are doing an incredible job. Maybe that's just kind of credit to the character itself. But anyways, that's my thoughts on Delicious in Dungeon or Dungeon Meshi. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure that like button down below, comment. Let me know if you get the series so far, if you're going to be checking it out. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button is on my content. And news reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you like this content and you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, membership button down below. Greatly appreciate what it does, and y'all take care.